I've always been very interested in missions and in the history of the church, and I read a lot of biographies. I love to read biographies of Christians, and I learn a lot from reading biographies. It's very interesting when you read a biography, because they all are very similar. Every biography I read, somebody gets born, and you find out the day they're born. Because you have a biography, you have to be born. Good morning. And so then you learn about where they grew up, and usually the first thing in the life of the person is their salvation. And quite often they get saved when they're children, or sometimes teens, or maybe a young adult. And so I learn about how people get saved when I read a biography. And I've always been very interested in how people get saved, because I want to lead people to Christ. And so if you can see what brought other people to Christ, then it'll help you when you're talking to people and trying to win people to Christ. And so you learn about their salvation, and then you learn about, after their salvation, how they began to grow in the Lord. And so then you learn things about discipling Christians, because you see what helped them to grow and learn. And if it's a biography, you're probably reading about a Christian who lived their life for the Lord. I haven't read any biographies about people who quit, who were, became 20 years old and didn't want to be a Christian anymore. You wouldn't write a story about that. So you're learning how a Christian disciples, that brings them to the place of wanting to serve God with their ministry. And you see the things that went into their discipleship. And then you see their calling. How do people know that God has called them to ministry? It's a very, very interesting area in the Christian life. People are called in different ways, and the Lord works in their life different ways. And I'm always interested in how we can disciple people and bring them to the place where then God's going to call them to ministry. And so every one of these biographies I read, I see how they're saved, I see how they're discipled, and then I see what brings them to their calling. And then they're called to ministry. And then after they're called to ministry, they always then have to train and prepare for ministry. So of course I want to train and prepare missionaries. And so I see what kind of training did they have? What kind of formal education did they have? What kind of practical training did they have? What helped them to go from calling now to becoming a missionary or a minister of the gospel? So you learn so much from reading biographies, but then you see them after they're trained. Then they have to choose a place to go, and then they have to go to that place, and they have to start their ministry there. And you see how they begin their ministry and how they work their ministry. So you learn about starting a ministry and working ministry and winning people to Christ and establishing churches, or all different kind of missions. And then you usually, though, most missionary biographies are about interesting missionaries too. They probably no one will write a biography about me, because my life wouldn't be interesting enough. But they usually have interesting things, so you see their zeal and their passion for the Lord and their excitement and all the exciting things in their life that happen. Now the one problem with a missionary biography is you read about 50 years usually in a few chapters of a book, and so you just see the highlights. And the one thing it doesn't show is for every missionary, there's long periods of just plugging away, doing the work of the Lord. Every day is the same. You get up, you eat your breakfast, you go out, you serve the Lord, you come home. So you don't read about that part of it. You just tend to see the highlights. So sometimes it can make missionary life look a little bit more glamorous and a little bit more exciting than it really is. Really, it's just faithfulness and commitment for years and years and years. Most of the missionaries, especially in an autobiography, they will explain that. And then you learn, you have to learn how to get old. You serve the Lord and life goes by. You have to see how to manage how you choose a wife and how you get married, and then you have to see about children and integrating them, whether you will have children, whether you won't. Some do, some don't. Some don't have a wife or a husband, some do. And so you see all these different things, and you learn about blending the family with ministry and making the two work together. You can see what's helpful and what's not so helpful. And then you can, like me, what do you do when you're 65 years old? You still want to serve the Lord. And so what different obstacles are there in your life? And so you read these biographies, they all get old, and they all keep serving the Lord, and they're old. And then you learn to die well. So the two things that happen in every single biography is they're born and they die. You never get surprised at the end because they always die at the end. You read another kind of book and they might have a different kind of ending. So I have these 5 books here with me. And I've read a lot of missionary biographies. And I had a couple of shelves in my library about that wide and about that wide, and I read all of those. But then we had a fire at our church and burned my library, and I lost all my nice missionary biographies. Now I have a new shelf. People gave me some. It's about that many that I have read and about that many that I still have to read. And then I read quite a few on Kindle. So, or from Amazon, and I just buy e-books, and they're a lot cheaper that way. There's one called Biographies of Great Christians, and it's, I think, 10 biographies, and they're about probably average 400 or 500 pages each. So you get 5,000 pages of reading, and it's about $2.50, something like that for the Kindle version. And so those, I read a lot of those too, and so that's a lot of reading though. If you get 5,000 pages in one book for $2.50, that's a good deal. I like to save money. And sometimes when I'm traveling, the little Kindle reader is handy for me to read because sometimes the airplanes are dark and you can just hold that. Nowadays they let you read a Kindle while the plane's taking off, and when it's landing, it's a lot more convenient than used to be. So it's a pretty long introduction, but I really want to encourage you. I found that reading these books is very motivational, and it really challenges us spiritually when we read about people and we see how they live for the Lord. I do want to read some few verses from Hebrews before I show you these books. So this is a little bit different. This is a Sunday school time, so I'm doing this like a Sunday school lesson more than a preaching time, and I just hope that this will motivate you and encourage you in your Christian walk. Hebrews chapter 12. You can open up your Bibles there to Hebrews chapter 12. Am I okay? Oh, am I moving around too much for you? I forgot about you back there with the camera. You're okay? Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. And let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. It's a wonderful passage, and of course the faith, we call it the Faith Hall of Fame in the Bible, is Hebrews chapter 11, and it talks about all the different prophets and preachers and women and men who served the Lord and made great sacrifices for the Lord. And then it says, seeing we are compassed about with such a great cloud of witnesses. So you see all of those witnesses, all of those people who served the Lord so faithfully in the Bible, and it says that should motivate us. And so seeing we are compassed about by them, we should lay aside the sin and the weight, those things that hold us back from serving God. We read about others that have gone before us. It really motivates us. And reading these verses, I started thinking about all these books I read and thought, those are more, we'll call them modern day, though many of them are 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Some of these ones are from this century too. But they're also, there's a great cloud of witnesses that aren't in the Bible. Men and women that have gone before us and served the Lord very faithfully in great hardship and sacrifice in their desire to see souls saved. And so they can be a great help and motivation. When I first went to Bible college way back in 1982, and that's when I read my first biography, and it was this biography. It's called To the Golden Shore. It's the life of Adoniram Judson. And this was the first one I ever read, and I had a different copy of it. This is a new one I just bought recently, but this one I just loaned out. This one was just read 2 times recently. A missionary friend of mine read it, and my sister-in-law just read this one. But we have one at home. It's a different color. It's black and gold, and it's an old one that I bought in 1982. Then I read it. Then my wife read it. Then my children read it. Then I put it in the church library, and other people read it. And everybody wrote in the front here when they read it and put their name in. And it's like our Our family heirloom is the To the Golden Shore, and it's such a long one. It's fine printing here and over 500 pages. It takes a little while to read it. It was the first one I ever read, and it became my favorite one, and that's my favorite missionary biography, and I would really encourage you to read this story. Adoniram Judson was the first foreign Baptist American missionary, the first Baptist missionary to sent from America anywhere in the world. And he actually wasn't a Baptist when he left. He was a Congregationalist when he left America. And in those days, it took a long time to sail across the sea. It took about 6 months for him to go to Burma, where he went. And in 6 months, though, he got converted to Baptist, and he became the first Baptist missionary. And then he went there he stopped in India first, and later traveled to Burma, and his ministry was in Burma. Quite a challenging story. And I found it very challenging and very encouraging. And for each one of these books, I'll read you a verse of the scripture. And there's one main principle in my life that each one of these books challenged me about. So I'll share that with you. And so I'll tell you a little bit about each one of these books. This book, sometimes I give away these books. I've done this lesson a couple of places. I went to a mission conference in Ireland, and I took these books over there. And in Ireland, it's a little bit hard to get some books like this to read. Here it's very simple to order them. You just order them on Amazon, and the next day you find it on your front step. But in Ireland, it's not quite that easy. So when I took the 5 books over there and I showed them all, and they really wanted them. And so I left the 5 of them there, and they put them in the church library so everyone could take turns reading them. So in Ireland now, they have all 5 of these. Then I went to Florida one time, and I did a mission conference in Florida, and I took these books with me, and I showed them. And then I said, some people don't know how to buy books on Amazon. Some people aren't very techy like that, and you can't find them in a bookstore. And so I said, if you don't know how to buy these books just to save you trouble, I'll sell you mine. And so I had a price for each one, just what I paid for them. But only problem was the people thought that I was in the book selling business, and I was going to make a profit from selling books, and I was only trying to promote books. And so you learn some things as you travel around in different churches. You learn, what do people think when you do this? But that's what people were starting to think, that I was a bookseller, and I'm just trying to promote books, and I'm talking so nice about these books, so people will buy them, and I'll make money. So I had to stop doing that. So then I went to Quebec, and I did a conference in Quebec, and I took these books with me. And so while I was teaching the lesson like this, I would hold up each one, and at the end I'd say, okay, who wants it? And they put up their hand, and I gave them the book. So I gave them away then, because I really want people to read and learn and be challenged about the Lord. I really want to encourage you. This is this is better than watching the Maple Leafs play hockey. You could still read this instead. Now, I know most of you could care less about the Maple Leafs. This is better than watching TV. Read this book. And so I would like to really encourage you to read these books. But this one, I have an extra one for you. So this one I will give away today. So this one is, like I said, it's way back in the 1700s. The first Baptist missionary goes to Burma, and he endures a lot of hardship. And that's that's the main thing I learned from this particular book, and a little bit like Hebrews chapter 12. Because in the Hebrews chapter 12, it talks a lot about, or in Hebrews chapter 11, it talks a lot about the sacrifice. Maybe I'll read for you, and you can look in your Bible at Hebrews 11, verse 37. It says talking about these Christians that went before us, they were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. Some of the hardships that these witnesses, these Christians that have gone before us, and sometimes, I make jokes about the hardship I have being a Christian in Canada. One day I went to church, and the air conditioner in my car didn't work well, and I got warm in my car. So that's the kind of hardship I faced in my life. But you compare that to the great sacrifice these made. But this, out of all the missionary stories, I found that Adoniram Judson, he just faced the most hardships in his ministry. Just great difficulty to go into Burma in the 1700s, where not one person even knows the name of Jesus Christ, and the standard of living was just so difficult there, and the persecution was so strong there, and the trials that he went through personally, just so he could take the gospel to those people. It's a very, very challenging story. And so right now, I'm going to give this book away. If someone would really like to read this book and would like to have it, you can just put up your hand. Someone puts up their hand. There you are. You're welcome to have this book. There you go. It's a very nice book, and I hope you'll read it, though. That's the only problem. One thing I learned, when you give away books, then people don't read them. If you sell them, they read them. Somebody pays $20 for a book, they'll read it. And anyway, I hope you'll read that and enjoy it. And if you get challenged from that, you could email me and tell me about it. Did you give it away already? Oh, you want to take a picture of it. Okay. So that's the first book. Again, my favorite. Oh, I didn't tell you the story about my black and gold, the old one with everybody. The cover's like falling off of it. It's all falling apart. And I was taking that one around to churches with me. And then my daughter, my oldest daughter, Krista, she heard that I was giving away the books. And she said, "Dad, you can't give away that book. It's like our whole family's got their names in there." I think you read it more than once, right? Did you read that 3 times? 3 times Patty read that whole book, and that's a big book. And some of my kids read it 2 times. All of my children read it, and a lot of the members. There's a lot of names in it. So my daughter Krista says, "Dad, I'll get you another copy. I'll get you a new one like that. And just give me the old one." So she saved it as a treasure. So it's in my daughter's house now, and we won't give up that one. But that one, I had an extra one, because I said that one's been read twice in the last month. And so it's already a little bit used. But I have another one of those at home in my office. Anyway, the next one, I have them in order here. This one's called Peace Child, and it's kind of interesting. And this one I like a lot. That one's my favorite. I don't know which one's my second favorite. Not this one, is maybe number 4. But I'm not doing them in the order of favorite, but by the lesson they teach. But one thing I like about this one is Don Richardson is a Canadian. And it's nice to have some of my missionaries. I love to read about Canadians. I read the most, anytime I see a missionary biography, if it's about a Canadian missionary, I'm going to grab that one right away, and I want to read it because I'm really excited about what Canadians have done and are doing around the world. I also read every single thing I can about China because my daughter's a missionary in China. Many of you know, if you've been around here a while, you know Beth and Neil Ray. And so I've probably read the most about China, and maybe second most about Philippines. But this one is about Indonesia, and it says an unforgettable story of primitive jungle treachery in the 20th century. This is the newest one. I think it took place in the 60s. He went into Indonesia, but it was still a jungle tribes he was reaching in Indonesia, and a very backward life, and very surprising that you would even find that kind of living still in the world in the 20th century. But he goes there, and it's very challenging when you go into the jungle, and he goes in with his wife and his child, and they actually go right into the jungle, deep into the jungle, and then just get the native people there to help them build like a bamboo house to live in. It's always incredible to me that people leave this comfortable culture we have here and go and live right in the jungle, in a jungle house with all those creepy crawly things there. I'm pretty sure my wife wouldn't want to live in a creepy crawly place in the jungle. Lots of spiders and snakes. She doesn't like spiders and snakes very much. It's bad enough being in Canada, right? But anyway, the Don Richardson goes in there. But now the people don't know a thing about Jesus Christ. They never heard the name. It's hard for us to imagine, but now you're going to try to take the gospel. They never heard Bible. They never heard God. They never heard Jesus. They have no idea there's an Old Testament, a New Testament, or David and Goliath, or anything. They don't know anything. They just have superstitions, and they don't even speak your language. How are you ever going to take the gospel to them? You know, when we're witness to people, they usually know some things. They know there's a God. Most people know there's a heaven or there's a hell, or there's a Bible. And they have a little bit of respect for that, though less and less in Canada. More and more now in Canada, we're finding that there's people that don't know anything about the Bible or about God. But certainly in my day, 40 years ago, when I was out first starting the church, most people in Canada knew something. Certainly in the Philippines, everybody knows who God is in the Philippines and who Jesus is, and they know what the Bible is. But here, nothing. And he was having a hard time. He was there for a long time, and he finally found it's called the Peace Child. And the Peace Child was something that was in their culture there that he learned about. And when he learned about the Peace Child, he was able to teach them about Jesus Christ, because the Peace Child had some similarities to him. And it's very interesting how he was able to use the story of the Peace Child in their culture to lead those people to faith in Christ. And then it ended up, though, almost the whole tribe got saved there, and they started a church there. It's quite an exciting story and a happy ending. The verse I want to share with you is from 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And I said Indonesia, it was in New Guinea. Sometimes I think of New Guinea and Indonesia there. I get them mixed up. In New Guinea. That's the missionary that we just had at our church that just read this book. She just came back from Papua New Guinea. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 22. For though I be free from all men, yet I have made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. And unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them that are without law, as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. These verses we have to be a little bit careful, because some people abuse these verses, but it does says you still are under God's laws. You know, we're still supposed to be moral people and holy people and godly people, but we do look for the things in the culture or the place where we are, and we want to try to understand the best way to reach those people with the gospel. And so when he talks about under the law or not under the law, he's just talking about if you were trying to reach a Jewish person, you might witness in a little different way than if you're trying to reach a Gentile person. And if I was witnessing to a Filipino, I would witness a lot different than I would to a Canadian. Or when I'm in China, I would speak to them a lot differently than a Filipino. And in Vietnam, very different again, how their culture is and how the people are there. We have to be very careful in the Philippines. I went into a public school, and I had like 1,000 kids there in the auditorium, and I said, you know, who would like to get saved? Well, in their culture, they have to be polite to the visitor, and so they don't say no, right? Every Filipino, you say, I want you to be saved. Well, they're going to, okay, every single one, 1,000 kids, every single one put up their hand. And they got, even the teachers, they all stood up too, and even the principal. Everybody was so polite to me. So you have to be a little bit more careful. In the Philippines, you might want to say, are you ready to be converted? You don't want to say, you want to, trust Christ, but you're going to use words like converted a lot, because they're all Catholics and they need to be converted. And so you want them to understand they're making a change. And so some of these things, but he really learns these things. He learned how to reach those people with the gospel. I had to learn how to reach Canadian people with the gospel when I went to my town to start a church. And I grew up And I'll tell you, well, I grew up in this town. I grew up in Richmond Hill. I went to Bayview Secondary School, and I grew up behind Hillcrest Mall. This is my home territory here. And then I went down to southwestern Ontario to start at a church in the smallest town with 500 people and just farmers. And I didn't know a thing about farmers and farming. And boy, it was a real challenge for me to learn the culture there and understand. Before that, we were in an inner city church, and we would just say, we're having free lunch on Sunday. Wow, the church was full. Everybody came for free lunch. Then I went to the farming community, and you invite the farmers. Okay, we're having free food at church. Not one farmer would ever go. They're not going to freeload a free meal. Farmers are proud people, and they want to work. If I advertise, I'm going to have a lunch at the church, will any of the neighbors come and help put the lunch on and bring some food? They would all come then, because they all want to work and help their neighbors. They have such a community spirit and a working spirit. Boy, you have to understand where you're working. It's a lot different, even inside Canada. But anyway, great book, The Peace Child. Somebody asked me after if they really wanted this book. I would part with this book. If somebody really wants this book, I'll part with it right now. Does anybody want that book? No? You're welcome to it. You do? Okay, I'll give you this book. There you go. There you go. But read it, okay? Don't just look at it. So, I might tell you later, or I'll tell you right now, one of the ministries we started in our church was we started children's homes. And we have quite a large children's home in the Philippines. Many children's, we call it in Filipino, Bahay Ampunan. So that means orphanage. We don't really call it an orphanage, we call it a children's home. The Bible talks about helping the fatherless. And so some of them have mothers. But in the third world, if you ever experienced the third world, you know that mothers have a hard time caring for children in the third world, and they need help. And so we have children's homes, and we have 4 more children's homes in Cambodia, and we're starting to build one right now in Vietnam, which is going to be very challenging because Vietnam is a communist country. We're not allowed to have a church there, but we do have a school there already, and they've licensed us to have a school. And it looks like they're going to license us for our children's home too. So we're pretty excited about that. Right now we're caring for about 300 children. That's a lot of food every day. It takes about $40,000 every month to feed 300 children to get their glasses and their schooling and their food. So every month we have to raise $40,000 to send over to look after all those children. And so this biography is probably number 2 or 3 in my favorites. This is George Mueller. And George Mueller has a very similar testimony to me, that he grew up without the Lord, and as a young adult he was a bit of a partier, and he was out partying all the time, but then he came to faith in the Lord, and he's so thankful the Lord saved him, and then he got a burden for helping children, and he started children's homes in England. In the 1800s, of course, in England, at that time, they needed children's homes. Nowadays, after he died, they didn't need children's homes there anymore because the economy came to a place where the government took care of the children, and even in Canada, we would never be allowed to build a children's home. But I love to read the story. He's known as a great man of faith, and he prayed a lot. He has a great reputation for prayer and how he prayed in the needs for the children, and there's miraculous stories of prayer. When the children had no food, and they would get up in the morning and pray, and the food would just miraculously show up that day. It's a great book of miracles. It's a great book of caring for children, but he also helped a lot with missionaries and Bible distributions, a lot of the things that he did in his life, a lot of those things that the Lord led me to do in my ministry, in my life. So when I read this book, I see a lot of things. Now, when I say that, I don't want to compare myself to George Mueller. This is an amazing story. You're a man of great faith. For me, I just started some things, and a lot of people helped me a lot, and the Lord helped me a lot, and we've seen some wonderful miracles, but I would never compare myself to him. But I love the story because he's doing similar things, or I should say I'm doing similar things than what he did. So somebody like this could really help me a lot, and I learned a lot. So it's a great story. I do want to read to you from James chapter 1, verse 27. And then I'll share how this challenged me according to this verse here. James chapter 1, verse 27 says, "Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world." For the Lord, this is pure religion, to take care of the fatherless and the widows, of course, and to remain unspotted. The Lord cares about fatherless children. And if you're paying attention as you read through the Bible, you'll see this come up many, many times, that God really cares about fatherless children. And He is the Father to the fatherless. And so He really challenges us about that. Now, of course, some people think of me as the missionary that just starts children's homes and helps children, but it's not really. That was the secondary thing. We went into the Philippines to reach people with the gospel and to start churches, and then we just saw some children and wanted to help them. And so our great commission is to go into all the world and preach the gospel, but certainly the Lord cares about the poor, and He cares about the fatherless. So I learned no matter how great the cause of world evangelism, it doesn't justify us ignoring the vulnerable people. When we're there preaching the gospel, we still have a responsibility to care for people. Now I'm thinking, I could give this one away too. Somebody wanted to, well, you were fast over there. Now you're getting used to this. There you go.
Thank you, Pastor.
I love to encourage people to read these things. They're so motivational. Now I'm going a little bit too slow. I better do this one a little bit quicker. We're running out of time. Now, I'll tell you right now, I am not going to give away this book. Now, this book is not in print anymore, and you're not even supposed to say this word anymore. It's not politically correct to say the word Eskimos in Canada, especially for some of you that are new to Canada. Don't go around in public saying this, because you'll offend a lot of people if you say Eskimos. But when this book was written, that's what we called the native people who live in the Arctic. Now we call them Inuit, and in the West they call them Inuvialuit, or you might call them right by their own name. This particular book takes place in Canada. So this is an American man. His name is Gleason Layard. It's hard to say. But he came from Ohio, and he worked in the Arctic of Canada. And he worked in the territory of Iqaluit and a little bit in Manitoba, the very top of Manitoba. Our mission, we had a lot of missionaries in the Arctic, so I've had a lot of experience working in the Arctic, and I've been to the places in this book personally, and I've been in the Western Arctic and Baffin Island and the Middle Arctic. I've been in the Arctic quite a bit the last 5 years, helping missionaries reach the Arctic people. So as I started working in the Arctic, one of the missionaries there gave me one of these books. Now I found this book on Amazon. The only problem is I bought the first one for about $25 on Amazon, but there's a limited number of them. So then I gave it away. Then I bought the next one, and it was $35, and I gave that away. And then I bought the next one. Well, I was creating a market demand, and the price was going up. The more I bought, the more the price went up. Now I think I bought so many of these, it's about $80 now, or maybe $100 to get one like this, especially one in this condition. See, it's just like new. No one's even read this one yet. This one's nice. Because it's a more modern one, it even has nice pictures in it. And I like this book. But if you want this book, you'd have to go on Amazon and pay $100 for it. And you won't find it on an e-book either, in Kindle books or anything like that. So there wasn't that many of these published. One of the ones I bought was actually autographed by him. And this is the one. Look at that. This one has his autograph and his life verse written right in it. And so this one I'll probably keep. But it's a great story about the Arctic. And he went there, I think, in the 1940s, and very difficult living in the Arctic in the 1940s. It's difficult enough now to go in the Arctic, except at least now you just fly in, you can buy some fresh vegetables, because the airplane brings food every day. And they have internet there, they have electricity there, they bring gasoline in the summertime by the boat, or in the wintertime they drive on top of the ice and bring gas and heating oil. And so it's, once you're in the town, they're like little islands. There's no way out of the town except by plane. In the summertime you can go by boat. But once you're there, you feel pretty normal. I felt a bit strange. I thought, what if the diesel generator breaks and the whole town has no electricity? And also the weather's bad there. When I tried to fly out, one time it took me 3 days to get a flight. The winds and the snow blowing so much. So it's kind of a strange place. It's very barren there, and it's, of course, very cold. Even right now in April, in Nunavik I was in Nunavik in April, and it was minus 26 was the high every day in April. So it's still pretty cold right now there. They haven't had the nice spring weather like us yet. But this man, he took his wife up there, and they got there, and they got on a dog sled and packed all their stuff on a dog sled, and then they would take off out into the cold to look for people to witness to. And there's not very many people up there. So they're on a dog sled with their stuff, and at nighttime there's no hotels there, no Holiday Inn, especially in the 1940s. There's nothing. They would stop their dog sled in the middle of the Arctic. It's minus 40 or minus 50, and they would build an igloo. The Inuit taught them how to build an igloo, and they would sleep overnight in an ice house. And if you have a nice wife from Ohio and you take her up to the Arctic and tell her she's going to go on a dog sled all day when it's minus 40 and sleep in an ice house, boy, that's a tough girl that does that. And a tough man that does that. It's pretty amazing. Just the hardships they endured there in the Arctic and what they were willing to do to take the gospel to those Arctic peoples. It's just so amazing. I just got so fascinated reading this. I'll share a verse with you from 2 Timothy 2:3, and I'm just going to read it. You could try to go there, but it's just a short verse. Thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. And that's what I thought about with him, that he endured hardness as a good soldier, but even more so his wife. I've read many stories about women going into the missions, and I'm amazed. I read a story about 2 girls going alone into the Arctic, and I read a fascinating story of two women going from the U.S. down to the Philippines way back 100 years ago in the early 1900s, and then going down to Mindanao, and then walking far into the southern jungles of Mindanao and building a nipa hut and living in there. 2 girls from North America. It's amazing what some of these missionaries and some of these women do. That's an amazing story. This here is I'm going to go fast on this one. This here is Through the Gates of Splendor, and somebody might have read that, but this is probably the most famous missionary biography there is in the Christian world. More people have read this biography than any other one. It's almost like a book that every Christian should read, Through the Gates of Splendor. It's written by Elizabeth Elliot. Her husband's name was Jim Elliot. And they went to Ecuador, you think in the 1940s. And they went to start a church in the jungle there. And it was deep in the jungle. That's Ecuador's in the middle of South America. And they had to fly in, and they landed their float plane on the river, and then they built the campsite, 5 young men there. And the native people, though, came out and were afraid of them, and they killed them all one day. All of the young missionary men, they were just in their 20s. They all just were newly married, just fresh out of Bible college. And they were all killed by the Aka Indians. So it's a very interesting story, and then written by the wife, who later went back to that tribe alone and led many of those people to Christ after her husband was murdered by those same people. It's an amazing, amazing story. He's very famous for his quote, Jim Elliot. He said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose." And I'll just finish by reading you from Mark chapter 9. So this is a man who literally gave his life to take the gospel to unsaved people. It's very challenging book, and it really makes you think about our purpose for life and what our life is all about. So I'll finish with the words of the Lord Jesus in Mark chapter 9. Remember, these are the words of the Lord Jesus Christ. Verse 34, Mark chapter 9, Verse 34. And when he had called the people unto him, his disciples also, he said unto them, Whosoever shall come after me, let him deny himself, and take up his cross, and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. For what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his soul? From this book I learned, and from these verses I learned, that the gospel is more important than life itself. So very motivational, very encouraging. You learn a lot about history and geography and everything when you read these books, but you also will get challenged to serve the Lord in a greater way. Well, thank you very much for my Sunday school lesson and a little bit of a practical lesson. And then later we'll have a little bit more normal preaching time at 11 o'clock. Anyway, nice to see you all, and let's take a break and get ready for church time.